Welcome to Let's Go Again, a podcast for the independent class where we contemplate the big questions like what is the artist's role in society? And we strategize for the smaller ones like how do I grow an audience when my posts reach about 5 people per day? We'll tackle those ideas and everything in between. I'm your host, Courtney Romano, a writer-director in Providence and your comrade in arms as we navigate this indie artist group project. My hope is that each episode is another chance for us to reset and figure out this path together outside of the system and on our own terms. So, as they say on set, let's go again. Okay, don't freak out, but the single most important skill you could possibly have as a 21st century independent working class artist, it's not pitching investors, it's not growing an audience, it's not working with, the most advanced technology in your field, or even getting connected within your industry. The single most important skill you could possibly have as a 21st century independent working class artist is writing. I know no one wants to hear it. Most people, even people who are incredible writers, hate the idea of writing. People say it's boring, it's irrelevant, it's useless. Why waste time on learning how to write and honing my writing skills when AI can write better and faster? Why waste time on writing when no one reads? Why waste time on writing when I have literally so many other things that I have to do as a solo artist, like that are much more important, like getting into fellowships and applying for grants and, I don't know, doing my taxes and producing my work. So why would I focus on writing? Why is that the thing? These are really important questions. And over the course of this episode, I am going to try to answer them in a convincing way that makes you realize how powerful it is to write better. But this isn't an episode just about like the value of writing in general. This is an episode about the value of writing that hooks. Writing in and of itself is not necessarily the end goal for this episode. Look, we could have conversations about how it's a benefit to society for people to read and write on their own without an end material goal. And I would be on that episode and I would absolutely proselytize that writing is an overall net good for people. But I want to talk today about why writing that hooks is so important, so vital to a strong artistic career. And that's because if you can write in a way that hooks an audience, it is the first and most powerful domino to fall and set your career into legitimate, momentum-driven, powerful motion. So let's get into it. Look, I don't think enough people are talking about this. I mean, writing is kind of boring to talk about, so I kind of get it. Like, who wants to talk about what Hemingway said is the act of writing, which is to sit down at a typewriter and bleed. That's what he said. And there are some people talking about it. There are a lot of people that I follow that are talking about it, but I want there to be like a cultural conversation about writing. I want BFA programs to be talking about writing that hooks. I want agencies to be helping artists develop the skill of writing that hooks. This skill, as far as I'm concerned, is the skill of the future. But you may be thinking right now, okay, Courtney, fine, whatever, nice. You're a writer, but I'm not a writer. So what do you mean by writing? Like, what writing am I trying to, make more hooky? So obviously, if you're a screenwriter or a novelist or a songwriter, you're writing in your craft. But I'm not talking about writing in art. I am talking about all the other ways that writing creates an infrastructure around your art. Things like social media captions, cover letters, grant applications, fundraising emails, artist statements, MFA applications, newsletters, podcast episodes, personal texts, personal emails. I mean, the list goes on. Writing is the infrastructure that supports our career. It is they are the roads that we take to get from one place to the next. Okay, so that might be pretty straightforward for you, but the next question you might have is, what do you mean by hooked? When I say hooked, I mean like you're a photographer and you're writing about the rule of thirds in photography and foreground, background composition. And the person who's reading your writing is a chef for a catering service who has never picked up a camera in their life, but they still hang on to your every word. and they want to know what you have to say about the rule of thirds. When I say hooked, I mean like people have told about 7 to 8 other people about your work. Or it means they don't just listen to your podcast episodes, your latest podcast episodes when they release, but they actually go through your backlog and re-listen to the ones they've already heard. What hooked really means is invested. And in this cultural moment in time, when people are investing their attention in what you do, doors will not stop opening for you. Getting investment from people's eyes and brain is huge. It's what all these huge companies are, who's going to get the most data? Who's going to get the most attention? Who's going to understand the audience the best? We don't have the benefit of algorithms, but we have something else. And that is hooky, wonderful writing that moves people. And I would say that while algorithms can change and people's habits can change, when someone taps into you and what you're writing and what you're saying and decides that you are worth listening to, this is a huge amount of power. Your next question might be, what if I have nothing interesting to say? Okay, maybe I should send an email newsletter out to my audience, but I have nothing to say other than like, oh, I guess I'm working on this song in the studio, or I'm writing a screenplay and there's like really nothing you can see yet. And it's going to be a 5-year long process. And I have nothing to say. Well, you do have something to say. And I'll get to figuring out how to say something and how to figure out what to say later on in this episode. But I want you to hold on to the idea that you don't need to say anything new. Like no one's ever said anything new, I don't think. No one wants you to say something new. No one on earth has ever said anything new. What they do is they say something that is their own take. Right? You're looking for your take. And I don't mean like a hot take. I don't mean like, oh, I'm seeing the trends and I'm doing a cultural trend report. Those are cool, but that's you don't have to do that. That's not even what I'm talking about. Your take is usually found at the intersection of 2 places. First, the specificity of your small, tiny, quiet lived experience that no one else sees. I'm talking like very small. I'm talking about like specifics in the realm of how you organize the food in your refrigerator. And you always keep all the dairy on the left, but then you moved into this apartment and your roommate started keeping it on the right. Like I'm talking about that specificity. That is very interesting. I want to know all of that. Or like you might be talking about an existential crisis in your writing. Maybe you're talking about lyrics that you wrote or the state of the world, who knows? And you relate that existential crisis to the feeling that you get when you look at a huge parking lot filled with cars that all look the same. That's my personal existential crisis, so that's why it came to mind. But that is a specificity that I'm talking about. Little things that no one else would know, but you say them and it gives an ultra specific, colorful picture of you. So it's the intersection between those specific lived experiences of yours and then where you experience tension. So let's talk about tension. I've been studying the structure of screenwriting lately, and I have really been interested in the differences and similarities between the 3-act structure and the 5-act structure. In a 3-act structure, you have Act 1 and Act 3 with 2 major tent poles of tension. The stakes are high, the consequences are high, the emotions are running high. Everything is like a huge deal in these 2 tentpole moments. And the rest of the story is over those moments, like the tent kind of rests on top of there. And then there's one huge one in Act 2 as well. So you kind of like get that look of like the circus tent or something like that. And these tentpole moments are moments of tension. They're the highest, most emotional, grittiest, hardest, most challenging moments for the characters. And if you have those 3 strong tentpole moments, you're going to have a story, you're going to have a structure. In 5-act structure, it's interesting because what you look at is actually the way consequences in the second half of the writing bounce off the seeds of action in the first. And this, by the way, is what I've learned from John York's book, Into the Woods. I'd highly recommend it if you're a writer or if you're just someone who wants to tell stories better. So what he says is essentially every idea that you have in Act 1 is going to show up as its opposite in Act 5. Every idea that happens in Act 2 or every event is going to show up in its opposite in Act 4. And then Act 3 is the big turn. So not only are you having all these little turns, so for instance, let's just say in Act 1, the first step is man gets married. Well, then the last step of Act 5 would be man gets divorced or man runs away or some kind of opposite action to this very first moment. And all of this works around the fulcrum of the third act, which is the midpoint, which is when the truth gets revealed. And when the truth gets revealed in these stories, in these well-written, structured stories, everything changes. And that's because of tension. That's because we expect one thing and something else happens. And there's a great amount of tension that rises up in the story, compelling us as audience members to find out what happens. We just have to find out what happens. And it's the tension, this tension that creates the hook. It's the tension that keeps you engaged, the tension that makes you want to find out what happens. And you don't have to be writing a 5-act screenplay like me. Like this could be applied to a caption on your behind the scenes Instagram carousel, or you could create tension in your newsletter that is going out to your email list to announce your next show, or you could create tension in a fellowship application, trying to get the adjudicators to read your whole application and then put you in the yes pile. Creating tension is a huge part of writing hooky, juicy, awesome writing. Specificity and tension. Okay, so let's talk about how to create tension. There's something that Octavia Butler calls the law of consequences. And she says we need to be asking ourselves, what are the unintended consequences of an event or idea? Okay, so in her essay, A Few Rules for Predicting the Future from Essence Magazine, Octavia Butler tells this story. She's going to the doctor for something that's really bothering her, and she gets this medicine, but the side effects are really unpleasant. And so she tells her doctor, look, I'm experiencing these side effects. It's helping the initial issue, but I don't feel great. And he says, well, don't worry, I can give you some medicine for that. And she's saying, okay, wait, I'm going to take medicine to help my side effects, but then what are the side effects of the medicine I'm going to take to help my side effects? And the doctor says, oh, this medicine has no side effects whatsoever. And she says in the article, I did not take that medicine ever because I know that there are side effects. I know something will happen. I know something's happening. And whether or not you can, this isn't a debate about like following medical advice or not, but the idea that there are always side effects. There are always unintended consequences to what we do. And in that article, she said, I don't believe we can do anything at all without side effects, also known as unintended consequences. They may be beneficial or not. They may be small and not matter, or huge and worth taking a risk for. But either way, they are always unintended consequences, and there are always unintended consequences to what we do. Okay, so how do we use this in our writing to create really captivating, hooky writing that gets people engaged with the work that we're making? A great way to get into this is just ask yourself, like, what is actually the unintended consequence of what you're saying? Let's take a really, really kind of like basic, easy example for this. So let's say you're on social media. I'm sorry for you. I'm just kidding. I'm so online. It's annoying. You're on social media and you're putting up a caption inviting people to hear your band play at 9 p.m. on a Friday night. Okay, so if I'm sitting there thinking about unintended consequences, I could think, okay, instead of telling everyone the details, like, come, it's at this bar at 9 p.m. on Friday night, and this is what we're playing, this is the set, whatever you would say, you could say something like, you think that you're going to come hear us play our new album at 9 p.m. on Friday night. But what you're really doing is getting into one of the coolest bars on the Lower East Side with people who like the same music as you, with the same Friday night plans as you, with the same ungovernable punk vibe as you. And so who knows what will happen after our set. So in that kind of a caption, right, you're suggesting the unintended consequences. You're suggesting you could meet someone cool. You could come up with a really cool story. You could find yourself somewhere else at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. You're kind of implying that there are forces at work outside of your audience's control and suggesting that good, interesting things might happen there. So it creates tension for the audience, getting them to wonder, what would happen if I went to that show? That is a hook. Okay, the next place to create tension is through surprises, which is sort of different than unintended consequences. As Octavia Butler said in this essay, surprises are not optional. So you can see this in modern politics. Let's take the meeting with Trump and Zelensky and JD Vance, and like Marco Rubio was kind of there at the White House, right? And this new alignment with Russia and the American presidential administration. So in 2008, that was impossible to think we would be aligned with Russia. Like, absolutely. No matter what your political stance was, that was a surprise. Like, did not see that one coming. And again, if you saw any of that video, that footage, it was incredibly compelling to watch. It was a hook. And again, like, we can debate the morality of that, but you can also just look at it objectively and understand, like, that was a left turn. And it was such a left turn that we were all like, wait, what is going on? Okay, so how do we use this in writing? How can you surprise the reader with something absurd? Here's the weird thing about it. Surprises don't actually make things like more interesting. They make things more realistic because life is absurd. It's just ridiculous. And if you are trying to be interesting, usually that's not very interesting. But if you are trying to be realistic and you're leaning into the absurdity of what is, that's actually super compelling. There's one of my favorite parts of Kinsley Versus, my digital series. I think it was episode 6 or so. There's this scene that's like really sad and disappointing and like, like kind of makes you sick to your stomach, where this main character, Kinsley, gets her heart broken and is also just like disappointed in her boyfriend as he's leaving. And they're having this like kind of not so bittersweet, but kind of bittersweet, just like, like goodbye that is just like unsettling and like sucks. And she's heartbroken. And he's walking out the door and he's like, the last thing he's like, I really like you. Like, I do really like you. And it's played by the great star, David Gow, and the beautiful star, Lauren Karaman. And they do it so well. And so David walks out the door and says, I really like you. And then Lauren says, enjoy. And it's one of my favorite moments in the entire series because it's so absurd. And we've all done that thing. Like we've all done the thing where like a server brings you your food and says, enjoy your meal. And you say, you too. Like all of that is just so funny to me and absurd and surprising and like non sequitur and yet so relatable. That is another way that you can create hooks through tension. All right. So the next way that you can create some tension in your writing is through this idea of enantiodromia. Did I say that right? Enantiodromia. Enantiodromia, which is essentially an idea that one thing, when played out to its fullest extreme, will turn into its opposite. So, for instance, cold things get hot, hot things get cold, wet things get dry, dry things get wet, and there is a tipping point where a thing becomes its opposite. Carl Jung talked about it in terms of psychological understanding. So he wrote, the characteristic phenomenon practically always occurs when an extreme one-sided tendency dominates conscious life. In time, an equally powerful counterposition is built up, which first inhibits the conscious performance and subsequently breaks through the conscious control. Okay. What does that mean? I hate to do this, but let's look at the musical Grease. Sandy, the main character, starts as an innocent and then by the end becomes a cigarette smoking, black leather wearing tough girl. Okay, so she's like being the good girl and, trying to get the guy by just being herself, which, okay, we can also discuss the merits of that storyline at another time, but just for these purposes, let's be objective about it. So she's trying to be good and she's trying to follow the rules, and then she doesn't get the guy. And then she realizes I have all this tension building up. I am not allowing myself to express this, what one might call a shadow side, but just the opposite side of my personal expression, and it's bubbling up and I have to lean into it. And so this is that idea that when something is pushed to its limit, it's going to transform into its opposite. So how do you use that in writing? A great question to always ask yourself is, what is a good counter argument to what I'm saying? So let's say you are submitting a grant application for your climate crisis documentary. So instead of saying something like, the climate crisis is really important to me, you could say something like, I never cared about the climate before I made this documentary. That's like not a great example, but it's clear which one hooks. Like if someone says like, this means a lot to me, I'd be like, yeah, that makes sense. You made a documentary about it. But if someone says, I was not interested in this at all when I began the project, and I convinced myself, I'm like, oh, I wonder what they learned. It creates this open loop where I'm like, oh, I wonder what the answer is. I wonder what they learned. So that is another way, by creating a counter argument against what your main thesis is, that you can create tension and create writing that hooks. Finally, you can create tension by creating a ballast. This is not my idea. This is from Colin Corrigan, who writes Story Energies on Substack. I highly recommend the read. I found him through his writing on Severance, because I was like, who's writing about Severance on Substack? I have to read everything. And I really enjoyed his writing and how he talks about the energy of storytelling. And so he says elastic energy is requiring a ballast. We need something solid to strain against, or we'll fall flat on our faces. So I think this is a really interesting concept, right? Because like you could even look at Severance. If Severance was just all like what does that symbol mean? And what does that symbol mean? And there was no actual like tangible hard facts that we could hold on to, even if those facts later on get subverted and turned and like twisted around to something else. If there was no real story we could hold on to, there wouldn't be that ballast, there wouldn't be that tension, and we might get lost. I might not be as compelled as I am by it. I kind of think about a ballast, or like this like strong structure that you can push against. I kind of think about it like Harlem Hill in Central Park. If you've ever run in Central Park, Harlem Hill is like this huge hill at the top of the park. And if you're running the whole loop, we used to get off the train at 59th and Park. And so we'd be at the bottom and we'd go, and halfway through the run, we'd get to Harlem Hill. And it was so hard. And you are running up against it. But like it was so enjoyable to run that hill, because you were really pushing against something. You could feel it. You could tell where you were. You could hear and feel your body. It was like pushing against something solid like that actually gave you a lot of energy and gave you a lot of kind of direction and kept you engaged, right? It was just like foot after foot after foot going up this hill. So the way that you use this in your writing is to say, okay, how can I help my audience know that they belong here? How can I give some structure to them to let them know, yes, this is the right place for you to be. And I'm going to walk you through it. There's going to be mystery, there's going to be magic and all that, but I'm going to give you some things to hold on to. This is a really kind of silly example, but it's true. Use really small words. I'm not saying don't use big words or don't use words that come to you, but see how easy you can make something to understand. Like tell it to me like I'm my 6-year-old, give real examples from your day-to-day life. Say more by saying less. If you are writing a newsletter about your merch, instead of saying, I designed this t-shirt by excavating my heart, mining myself for the truth, and developing a design I hope connects with you, say, I put my guts on a t-shirt. Like that's so much more compelling to me. I want to know, what are your guts? Why did you do this? How much? So those are just there's of course so many ways to create hooks and to create hooky writing and to create compelling writing. And the truth is you just have to practice it. You just need to do it and start practicing and notice the writing that you read that you think is like, oh, this is compelling me. I always open this email. Why do I do that? Why do I read that? And there are unexpected results, right? Unintended consequences, which the first one is people will start repeating you back to you. And I think this is really important right now. I can't undersell how important it is to have a point of view, have a belief system, be able to articulate it, and have people listen to it right now. Because there's a lot of mishandled attention out there, because there's a lot of people who are lying to us. And there are a lot of people who are selling us things that we don't need to buy. And there are a lot of forces at work that are trying to wrest control and power and freedom from working class people. Artists, non-artists, the working class. And to be able to have someone repeat something back to you that you've said means they've tuned in at least 7 or 8 times. They've tuned in and they are listening. And when you can create an idea that hooks and gets people to listen and repeat yourself back to you, this is a movement. And I'm not saying that everyone needs to like have, it sounds like I'm saying like form a cult. I don't mean that. But I mean, like, what do you believe? What do you believe in? If you believe in something big, writing has to match that idea in some way. It doesn't mean you have to be Hemingway. Doesn't mean you have to be Octavia Butler. It just means that you have to be as hooky and as compelling as you can be, because your ideas deserve that level of proficiency and your ideas deserve that level of volume and impact. The second thing that is unexpected is your career is going to start to take really odd surprise turns. So I think tension creates locked doors, and hooky, compelling writing creates ways to find out what's on the other side of those doors. So for instance, if you saw Succession season 4, first of all, if you haven't, there are going to be some spoilers, so just skip ahead like a minute. But if you saw season 4 of Succession, you know that in episode 2 they do an unthinkable thing where they kill off the patriarch. You think that they would leave that for the last episode, right, of the whole season. I'm sorry, of the whole series. But they do it in episode 2 or 3, I forget. And because they do it early, because they create that tension of like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? Then they have to answer it. And what they answer it with on the other side is the rest of that season where all kinds of things happen that we had no idea would happen. And that is really interesting. And I think there's an underlying principle there, which is to say that if you go towards that tension, and you allow yourself to kind of not be afraid of it, not resist it, just actually like lean into it, you're going to be forced to answer these questions and come up with these ideas and position yourself in certain ways that like you could not have come up with without addressing that tension, without leaning into that. And when you are writing like that, so many doors open up that you couldn't have predicted because people see that you're doing something differently, that you are believing in something, that you're going after something, that you are putting your stake in the ground. And not only are you doing that, but like you're also having a little fun with it. People want to be around that. And that is something that I wish they taught in BFA programs. Okay, that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Would love to hear what you thought about this episode. Leave a comment on Substack and tell me if you have any questions about tension or hooky writing or the word enantiodromia. And I have one ask when it comes to sharing this. I'd be so appreciative if you texted this episode to a friend. If you got something out of it, sharing one-to-one is really wonderful and how I'd love to grow this podcast and our little movement here. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for being here and listening and doing all the things that you are doing in the world. We need your stuff, so keep making it. And until next week, good luck out there.